So the first question is simply, how does your work with boys and/or girls foster resistance to the kind of disconnection we talked about this morning? And I want people to start off with telling us a little bit, of course, what they do and who they are. Please look in your folders in terms of their full bios, because everybody up here is pretty impressive, and heads of schools, and a fantastic teacher, and doing great work in the schools. Okay, thank you. So that's the first question. Celine, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Celine Kagan, and I am a faculty member at Elisabeth Irwin High School, which is the high school for the Little Red Schoolhouse, which some of you may be familiar with. We are one of actually the oldest progressive school in New York City. And what I do, and the reason why I'm on this panel, is that I teach a course called Oh Boy, Exploring Masculinity in Contemporary American Culture, and it is a part of our English curriculum. So one of the reasons why I'm here is to talk about how it is that we can bring these issues that we've been talking about today into the classroom, into an academic setting, and have students look at these issues as they're reading literature, as they're working on analytical writing, as they're working on creative writing, and as they are developing relationships with their peers, with their teachers, and also thinking about the kinds of relationships that they're developing with their families at home. So how do we basically bring this conversation into an English language arts classroom?
My name's Joe Cox.
Actually, you know what, Celine? Why don't we do that first? Because then I want you to answer the second part of the question, which is kind of
okay.
But actually, I think it's better. Why doesn't everybody go around and tell what they do, and then we'll go back to that question. Go ahead, Joe.
My name's Joe Cox. I'm the headmaster of the Haverford School. It's an all-boys school in outside of Philadelphia. It's a very old, non-progressive school. And with the help of Brad Adams, the IBSC, and Michael Reichert with his On Behalf of Boys, which is morphed into the Center for the Study of Boys and Girls' Lives, I think we've become a little bit more countercultural in breaking down men's stereotypes and so on. But glad to talk about that a little bit later.
My name is Kate Windsor, and I'm the head of Miss Porter School, which is an all-girls boarding school in Farmington, Connecticut. I also have been, for the just finished a doctorate where I worked with Carol Gilligan exploring how adolescent girls define success. The focus of my work, both as the head of an all-girls school, so a practitioner, and as a researcher trying to understand girls, is really to differentiate the ways in which gender matters to one's experience. We would agree at Miss Porter's school that our girls have the same capacity to solve or understand the quadratic equation as their counterparts at Choate down the street. However, the experience of being a girl, whether it is a stereotype threat in a math classroom, or their desire to be mothers and understand how that might impact their work as a mathematician later, is an opportunity that we have to explore, engage in, and respond to in a single-sex school.
I guess I'll introduce myself again. Hi, I'm Albert. Just to speak a little bit about the Men of Strength program. Men of Strength has been part of the Men Can Stop Rape organization for 11 plus years now. And we have over 100 clubs across the nation. And it's middle school, high school, and college. And they're actually thinking about opening one up here in NYU, another club. And we have this one-year curriculum in which we tackle all the issues again on masculinity. We focus on counter stories of masculinity and just practice positive and healthy masculinity. And it's basically we offer a support group for guys, and it's all males, again facilitated by adult males.
Gareth, you want to add anything?
I just wanted to make sure, I don't know if I said my title, social worker. Somebody thought I was a cop. No. Okay, no. So I'm a New York State licensed social worker, and I have been at my school for 11 years. And I think I said everything else.
You want to say?
I'm Jamie Santan. I'm just happy to be here. Rap Head leader, most loved. Facilitated classes. I'm a nursing student trying to get my CNA. That's about it.
So now, if we can answer the second part of the question.
The second part of the
which is
question.
How does your work with boys and girls foster resistance to the kind of, disconnection we were talking about this morning?
The work actually does its own work, and I think that's the beauty of it. Is as soon as you bring this conversation into the classroom, it starts working right away because the kids know that what you are saying to them about stereotypes being incomplete, about stereotypes being limiting, is true. The second you bring in the word stereotypes, what are some of the stereotypes we have about men and boys? They're not really stuck for what to say. Nobody's sitting there scratching their head. And ideas just start flying, and then from there it's a very easy step to, is this, if you're a boy in the class, does this describe you? If you're a girl in the class, does this adequately describe any guy that you know? And clearly it doesn't. So right away they're on board. And I don't know if it's so much fostering resistance as immediately spreading awareness. And what they choose to do with that information really varies from student to student. And for some students, it's a lot easier to resist. And some students feel they have a lot more at stake, depending on where they fall on the spectrum of their own masculinity and their confidence in themselves, just overall. And you really see that. You really see that come up right away. But in terms of fostering resistance, one of the key things to do is to introduce that language into the classroom right away. And so much of this is about language. I mean, that's where it starts on every level. So you start talking to them about accommodation and resistance. And of course, initially they're a little bit unsure about, well, what do you mean by accommodating or resisting the stereotypes? And one of the things that's really helpful is talking to them about data mining, and how we always look to confirm what we are told is true. So the example that I use is, women are bad drivers. So if you see a woman and she's a bad driver, oh, of course she's a bad driver. She's a woman, and you don't notice the woman parallel parking, smooth as anything. You never notice the woman who's driving well. Why? Because it doesn't confirm, it doesn't connect to anything that you are supposed to know. So as soon as you apply that to boys, they start to think about how they resist and how their friends resist and things that they do that don't fit the stereotypes, and start to value that behavior and start to see that behavior as actually doing work not only for them but work for other people in terms of being a healthy, functioning human being. Now the way to make it academic, because this is an English class, is to give them theory to use, and what I bring into the classroom is the model of gender role strain, which is this idea that there's different categories in which men will feel that they are not man enough. And it really just breaks down the toxicity of masculinity. So there's the discrepancy strain. So if you don't see yourself as fitting into this idea of being a man, let's say you're not tall, let's say you're not athletic, right? You suffer this feeling of strain because there's a discrepancy between your idea of a man and who you are. And then there's the dysfunction strain, which is even if you fit in and you're doing everything right, there's something inherently dysfunctional about that. And then there is the trauma strain. So the way that boys are socialized is inherently traumatic. If you think of hazing, if you think of sports, where they're physically exposing themselves to harm, both physically and psychologically, that gives them a feeling of strain as well. So as soon as they have this gender role strain paradigm in mind, we can start attacking literature and looking for the ways that the male characters that we read about embody this strain. And we use that as a tool for understanding why characters act the way they do, looking at the larger context in which they're living, what are the expectations that they feel that they need to live up to. And we read a wide range of texts. We start off the course reading A Rose That Grew from Concrete, which is a collection of poetry by Tupac Shakur. And his poetry reveals a very different side to Tupac than one might expect. He's looking for relationship. He's vulnerable. He's emotional. And one of the things the kids love to point out is that he dots his I's with little hearts, because they have, his actual handwriting. So we look at the ways that, in his poetry, we see Tupac both experiencing this gender role strain and also resisting what is expected of him. You know, how he writes love letters to his male friends, for example. And then from there we move into Drowned by Junot Diaz, which is a series of short stories. And one of the stories that we read is about two boys, they're best friends, and they have an experience one night where one of the boys gives the protagonist a hand job. There's no delicate way to put that. And there just really isn't. And it's interesting how the kids are not curious about, well, does that mean he's gay if he let his friend give him a hand job? I mean, that's not what's interesting to them. What's interesting to them is whether or not the friend did this to make his other friend feel more comfortable, to have this feeling of connection, how it fits into the context of their closeness and their relationship. So pointing out to them, you guys aren't wondering about his sexuality. How is that an act of resistance? What are you resisting by not questioning his sexuality, but rather looking at the context in which this is taking place, which is this friendship? So, and then you build it up from there. And then the main novel that we read is Wait Until Spring by Bandini by John Fonte. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. And it just builds on itself, and then they develop the tools and they know what to be looking for, and they have the language to articulate what they see.
I've been at Haverford now, this is my 14th year, and despite the good early work by Michael Reichert, it was a pretty Darwinian place and a very dichotomous way of thinking, I think, about gender, and although there had been some inroads. And this past summer, I had Deep Secrets as the faculty reading. And Niobe was kind enough to come up and present it and talk with Joseph and Michael. And the reason I picked Niobe's book was, one, it's a very authentic and rigorous academic study, so there was a great review of literature, and I wanted my faculty to know that they're part of a larger context, and wanted them to have that sense of a review. But more importantly, it's a book obviously about the emotional lives of boys. And I think the work that's gone on over the past years has been focusing on emotional intelligence and focusing on treating every boy as an individual, developing, we changed the context from preparing your son for college to preparing your son for life. Easy transition to a discussion of being a full human being prepared to make a full contribution to your life and the lives of others. We've worked through the International Boys School Coalition with a lot of like-minded boys schools from around the world. We've worked through the Center for the Study of Boys and Girls' Lives, and we've done a lot of work on the ground. And this is part of my brain twirling as I was listening to a lot of good things. But Michael, I remember there was some resistance to Michael's work, specifically by a board member who told me, you know what he does? My son came back and told me he cried in front of his classmates. We don't want that happening. And now her son is a board member, and I think is somebody who's going to make a big difference as his sons go through this school. So Michael's work with our peer counseling, my middle school head, who's a graduate of the school, Jay Graytalk, is sitting back there, and his perspective, which is a longer perspective of mine, I think will essentially validate that it's an effort to develop a boy's full humanity, emphasize the emotional side of his life, listen to boys, and better prepare them for life.
I just also have to say that I know he wasn't going to say, he's also a published poet, and at the back of Deep Secrets, at the end of it, it ends with a poem that he wrote about what we do to boys when they enter school and how much we mess them up, basically. teaching, and us. And it's a beautiful, beautiful poem, but he's published a series of a book of poetry, and it's really beautiful, beautiful poetry, so. Kate?
Well, I was heartened to hear the girls talk today about the need for the adults in the community to hear their voices, and that if there was one thing that would be different about their experience, it would be that their principal or head of school would know them and listen to them. That would be what I would identify as being at the core of the resistance at Ms. Porter's school. So beginning with the practitioner action research that happens starting with the head of school, but then throughout our school, where the faculty are engaged in having conversation with the girls about their experience and their needs, as well as our commitment to youth participatory action research, where the girls themselves are studying their experience and through that able to define for us what their expectations are. We have a lot of expectations that we set for defining success or a successful experience within our schools for our students, but it's fascinating to understand their own definitions of success and expectations, to understand how their experiences are informed by these definitions and their personal goals, and the context from their own point of view. So how is the setting or the setting of the school either helping them achieve that or impeding their opportunities? I think what happens most is they reveal to us the fact that we are oftentimes sort of paradoxical in the statements and the messages that we give them. So I'll give you an example because hopefully it will clarify the ways in which this engagement in their voices helps us do a better job of the work that we do. So at a girls' school, we oftentimes reinforce some of the stereotypes that we're fighting against. So we say it doesn't, one of the joys of being in an all-girls school is it doesn't matter what you wear, it doesn't matter what you look like. What I think the intention is to suggest is that girls are oftentimes put in a position where they dress or their appearance is reflective of their getting a boy's attention or what boys want from them. So we say it doesn't matter what you wear, how you look, and girls are oftentimes sloppy in girls' schools if they don't have a uniform or those sorts of things. And of course we all know it does matter what you wear, and it does matter how you look. And I give a talk to the girls where I say to them, in fact, what would happen if I were now standing in front of you at morning meeting in my bathing suit? That would matter. It would matter a lot. Or if I showed up in a gown, an evening gown, you would say, what in the world is wrong with Dr. Windsor today? We knew what was wrong with her yesterday, but today she's now in a bathing suit. So it does matter. And for girls and for women, it's complicated because we've also said you can you can dress in a wide range. You can dress in a way that's stereotypically female, and that can be appropriate. You can wear a dress, you can wear a skirt, you can have long hair, or you can dress in a way that's stereotypically male. You can wear pants and a jacket. You can have short hair. But we don't talk a lot about why you would dress in one way or the other or how that impacts. And it's fascinating to talk to the girls, and when they say, you know, you're going for a job interview, every man that comes for a job interview at Miss Porter School has short hair, he has some version of a jacket, a collared shirt, and pants. The girls say, should we wear skirts? Should we, you know, how should we present ourselves? So we give this big message about it doesn't matter how you look, but the girls know it does. We say to them, you can sort of have it all, and you can be a man and a woman, but we don't quite help them make their way down that path to the multitude of decisions that we then put in front of them around negotiating being a woman. So that's just a simple explanation or an example of the ways in which we both sort of fib to the girls and they call us out on it. And we also complicate our lives, their lives, with the intention of actually simplifying them by saying, you know, it doesn't matter, or gender doesn't matter. Wear pants, wear a dress. Gender does matter, and we should talk about it.
You know, when you were talking, I'm sorry, Celine, when you were talking about like curriculum, I'm not an educator, but being school-based and seeing what's in their curriculum, there's a model of training now going on in my school, Understanding by Design, and the teachers are setting up curriculum with the idea that this big idea is going to be prevalent throughout the course in the semester. And they've come to me because we're trying to figure out how can we incorporate lessons about healthy, unhealthy relationships in the curriculum. It comes up in English in the literature they're reading. It comes up in social studies. It comes up in math with statistics. It's in the physical education classes with what they're taking. So it's like trying to work with staff by giving what I know and how to make it real and connected to what they're doing in the classroom. Almost every kid in my school ends up reading Romeo and Juliet, and there are so many disturbing themes about masculinity and femininity and the relationship and the fact that Juliet was a minor and this whole kind of hopelessness of love thing. But it's like, if the teachers are able to go in there empowered with knowing what I'm able to provide for them, it can actually turn the way they're able to teach it in, I think, maybe more of a responsible way where they're able to address the issues, because the issues are there, but most of the time it's not being addressed. So I always try and encourage that. But like the direct work with the kids, really working in the groups, being consistent, challenging them when they say things that are wrong. It's like trying to use gender-neutral language. We encourage them to use the term partner when they're talking about relationships, because we don't want them to be stuck on this idea of boyfriend, girlfriend, and what that means in terms of the heterosexism, and understanding that relationships, there are all different kinds of relationships, and there's abuse in all different kinds of relationships. And we don't want to alienate anybody in our audience when we're doing workshops by just saying, yeah, it's when a boy likes a girl. So trying to do that. We also, it's like we do a lot of school-wide campaigns at my school. Women's History Month, International Human Rights Day, which is actually today. So didn't really do anything because the school is closed. But it's like we do a day, we do a week long in February about teen dating, violence awareness, and prevention. And one of the keys in that is talking with the peer leaders, male and female. What do you see as the best message we want to get out to people? It's like, how do we challenge ourselves? One year we had the football players do the National Day of Silence, which is raising awareness of LGBTQ bullying. And that was such a powerful message because of the homophobia in the building, that the football players who they see as like the most masculine, participating in it and handing out these cards saying, this is why I'm being silent. So it's really working to change the culture of the school so that it's one of safety and inclusion and respect.
And just one way I start with, like with my group, we start with the man box. And you know, I would pose the question, what do you, to you, what is a man? And then we start filling in the box, you know, and they normally say the same things over and over again: dominant, strong, construction worker, doctors, basketball players, football players, pimps, girls. And then we have them list, so what falls outside of the box? Nurses, maids, crying, you know, what you would expect. And a lot of times I ask them, how many of you feel like crying sometimes? And they would raise their hands. Why don't you cry? Because I'm called a sissy, a punk. So then we start getting to the conversation of what kind of pressure that puts on them to put this mask on when they're inside the classroom, when they're with their friends, to be tough, to become athletic, to have money, have a bunch of females around them. And we get into these conversations. Then also we preach accountability. So then that's the next step. Now, with the group of guys, we have this set of rules in which they are allowed to check each other. So if one of the guys were to come into the room and say something like, oh, you know, this girl was acting like a B, you know, says a B word, the other one comes and says, hey, maybe you shouldn't call her that. She has a name. And that's the beauty of it. Once they start learning about accountability and they take responsibilities for their actions and what they're saying. Because a lot of times we have the bystander effect where someone is saying something totally off or wrong and no one corrects them, so they think it's okay. So we get this, I have this group of guys who are able to challenge each other, but not to hurt each other, to help each other, and then they understand that.
And Jamie actually had an experience in class with a math teacher that was saying something and qualified it with no homo. And Jamie ends up like raising his hand and saying, "Yo, you really need to come to Men of Strength meetings." And that was, and it's like that was like an awesome thing for the teacher to be called out on using that kind of language by a student. That it's like. It's like the systems where the teachers are coming from, they need training on institutionalized racism, on gender stereotypes, on all of these issues that we're working with the kids on, because that stuff is coming into their classrooms whether they like it or not. So it's like, I feel like the school systems definitely need to be addressing this in the training of teachers.
Because again, it could be something as small as coming in and saying, "Oh, you seen Twilight? That's a chick flick." What do you mean that's a chick flick? What if I like Twilight? What if I love wolves and vampires? It's a love story, you know, but something as simple as that, it also hurts as well, and also, you know, plays into these stereotypes.
I think speaking on the calling out my teacher, I think that it really falls back on the teacher, and then they're like, "Oh, well, now I'm gonna call you out and everybody else that talks like that." So it's like, they understand what they did wrong, and then they try to project it on everybody else so that they understand that what he did was wrong while he's understanding what he did was wrong.
It's a teachable moment in action.
So one of the questions that's been asked here a couple of different times of the day, Carol posed it first this morning by asking the question, how come we're still going along with or believing things we know the evidence disputes or doesn't back up? Lise was saying that despite the science that she presented, the Gurian Institute trains thousands of teachers in a model based upon science that doesn't exist. So the question we want to ask the panelists now, these folks on the front line fostering resistance, is what kinds of challenges have you encountered in your work? How have you handled those challenges? And what advice would you give to other folks in schools that might want to take a page from your book? Celine?
Well, I certainly don't claim to have any advice, that's for sure. I think that the challenges that I face are twofold. There's, the challenges that I face inside the classroom with certain students, but then there's the larger challenge, which is what is happening outside of the classroom. And we can't address those challenges until we address the fact that we live in a culture that is deeply misogynistic and deeply homophobic. And so much of why our boys struggle is because of this. So much of the reasons why we all struggle is because of this. So the main challenge that I face is that we're sexist and homophobic. I mean, that's a huge challenge. What makes it more so is the fact that the binary structure of our language reinforces this on our most deep core level. So it's almost as if we have to change what words mean. We have to change how language works to really address this challenge. Because if you think about it, one of the main things that the kids walk away from, and this might actually be one of the in the classroom challenges, is that as a guy, you spend your day trying to avoid two things, which are intertwined, but two things: being called girly and being called gay. Like, this is really what your day is about. How can I successfully navigate everything that I need to do from the minute I leave my house so nobody calls me a pussy and nobody calls me a fag? Sounds like a fun day. Sounds exhausting if you ask me. So what ends up happening is that, and of course anything that's gay is associated with being feminine. So because of the misogyny, they hate any characteristics that they have that they associate with femininity, because anything that's masculine is exactly the opposite of feminine, and we hate women. So my emotional side, my feeling side, my side that needs relationships, I'm supposed to hate that part of myself because that's girly. So until being called girly ceases to be an insult, where if somebody says, "Man, that's so girly," it's like, I know, right? Then we're always going to have a problem. So that's the biggest challenge. Is there's no larger support in the world that we live in, and there's no language. I mean, you were talking about saying the word partner. Language is so powerful, but there's no way of getting around it. I mean, I read something once about how nobody would want to go to the hospital and get seen by a doctorette. You know what I mean? It's just I'll take the doctor, no, I'll pass on the doctorate, thank you. So, until the boys can learn to, first of all, get past this binary and embrace all aspects of themselves, we're faced with an enormous challenge. And what ends up happening is that the boys know better, but they don't do better, because if they do better, cue being called a girl, being called a fag. And the bigger question is, well, what does this mean for our boys that are gay? Where do they fall into this conversation? And I think that that's the most difficult piece to discuss, is that there is still, even though all boys are boys, and we shouldn't have to talk about straight boys versus gay boys, because boys are boys. The fact that this is the way the language works, and these are the associations that we have with my class, I still wonder how to better address that piece of things, because I still want all boys to think that they're boys, regardless of what their sexual orientation may be.
Okay, so I have to push Celine a little bit on this, because I sat in her class, so I'm going to get you. So she has taught the class 3 years in a row. I've sat in on
3 years, I've done
4 years in a row, and I've sat in on 3 of the classes. The last one I didn't sit on. And she struggles with girls and boys in the class, about half girls, half boys. Some of the kids get it immediately, and some of the kids struggle. But I'd be curious for you to share some of the 1 or 2 examples of a struggle you had in terms of teaching this kind of, and being in the classroom with these kinds of things.
Okay, well, I'll read this right here. So for the final project of the year, the kids are given tremendous free rein, and they're told to do a 3-part project that somehow explores their own masculinity ideology, which is extremely complicated, and they really struggle with it. And they can do anything. I mean, they can literally do anything. There's a written component, a visual component, and a presentation component, and they can be as interconnected or not, depending on what the student wants to do and what talents the student has. So I had a student write a personal essay, and this student is, I can honestly say, truly one of the brightest I will ever encounter in my career, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for this kid. And he wrote a paper about his older born-again Christian brother coming out. Yeah. And this is just a portion of the essay, very, very short. There was a strange notion I felt during this class, and I'm fairly certain was unintentional, and yet, like the characters of the various texts and films we've analyzed, was very telling of an underlying concept. Although this class is revolutionary in its subject, and I don't mean that lightly, it has a slight air of unconscious condescension in regards to traditional masculinity. We've spent an enormous amount of time discussing the way cultural gender roles contradict each other and cause strain, looking at characters like Svevo Bandini and Victor Vargas in an almost pitying light. While I know the intent is the exact opposite, it feels like we've been told that if they only knew better, they could have lived their lives the right way. And I can certainly understand how it can come across as being condescending, because some of the boys here, you've been doing this all wrong. You've been thinking of yourself all wrong. Everything you thought you needed to be, all wrong. And I'm going to show you now what it is you need to do to live a healthy, happier life. And for a teenager, that's a lot, and that's a lot coming from an adult. So I think one of the challenges that I face is getting them to feel like they come to it more organically on their own. I think that the messaging can be a little strong, because you're trying to show them the hand in front of their face. You're trying to suddenly make them hear the white noise that they haven't heard. And we all know that kids learn best through discovery. And I don't know if coming in and just pulling back the curtain is necessarily the best approach. And as I continue to work on this class, is thinking of ways that they can more subtly come to that realization themselves.